Hi, welcome to the Django screencast. Last time, we implemented the syndication framework into an existing blogging application. By the end of that episode, we had implemented an RSS feed into the application so that users could subscribe to our blog and find out whenever we posted new entries. This time we want to continue on that theme, and we're going to implement what we call ModelBased Feeds. A model-based feed is essentially a feed that's built around a particular model. Now, this is not an official term for it, but it's a way that I've used to just kind of identify in my own mind exactly what we're doing. The easiest way to think about it is, if you remember from last time, we have some sections over here. We might write about Django or Rails or JavaScript or .NET or PHP or what have you. Some of our readers may want to subscribe to our Django-based feeds, but are not interested in blog postings about our kids or our family, or maybe they're not even interested in postings about Rails or PHP. In that case, it's a good thing to implement these model-based feeds around particular sections for our blogging application. So, for instance, a user that was only interested in Django-based feeds could subscribe to an RSS feed that would only provide to them those articles that we post that show up in the Django section. So let's get started. If you recall last time, I said I'd like to start with my urls.py module, and this time we're going to do the same thing. Just as a way of a refresher, if you remember, we implemented a URLs pattern match to support our feeds, and in this case this pattern match would match something called feeds/ and a URL pattern. For our feed, this information gets passed into this feed dictionary, which is implemented up here. In this case, we're looking for a key of latest, which then references the latest articles class in the feeds.py module. Now, if this is confusing you, I suggest that you go back to the first episode and just refresh this information. What this does for us is that we end up with something that gives us localhost 8000 here, blog/feed/latest. In this case, the latest is the key, and it returns back to us all the latest articles, or at least the last 5 based on pub date articles in our blog. So the goal this time is going to be to implement something that will be /blogs/section/ and then Django or PHP or what have you. In order to do this, we need to match a key called section instead of a key called latest. So let's do that now. We don't have to modify our URLs pattern down here because of the way the syndication frame works. It will match anything after feeds. In this case, we're going to match feeds/section, so that needs to be the key that we use up here. So let's add a new key to our feed dict called section, and it's going to point to a class that we haven't implemented yet, and for this case we'll just call it latest articles by section. Reasonable enough. And if you recall from last time, in order to reference this in our module, we need to be sure to import it up above here. Let's go over to our feeds.py module and make the changes there. Just like last time, this is really where the bulk, the meat of the code is going to be that controls how the feed works. We're going to do something very similar to the last time, but instead of being a overall feed for application, it's going to be this model-based feed. The model that the feed is based on is going to be section. Now you might think to yourself, well, the feeds are articles, so wouldn't that be the model that it's based on? But what we're saying is that we're going to find all the articles for a specific section, and that's the model that we're talking about when we say model-based feed. So first thing I need to do is import section into this module, so I have access to it. And I'm just going to go ahead and start with copying this beginning section, because for our new class we're going to do something very similar. If you recall, we called this latest articles by section. It will also inherit from feed. And we're going to specify the title template and the description template to be the same templates that we implemented last time. And now you'll begin to see the benefit of specifying these explicitly as opposed to using the templates names that would be the default. This way we don't have to create our templates again, because they're going to be very basic in nature, and they will be supported by what we're doing here as well. We can look at drawing this up here in a minute. Now, there's a couple of important changes when we're implementing these model-based feeds. The first thing is we have to implement a method called GetObject. So let's do that now. The GetObject method is responsible for returning back the model that the feeds are based upon. Again, in this case we're talking about section, not article. GetObject gets passed in a parameter called bits. Bits is everything that occurs after the key that we had in the urls.py module. So if we have something called blog/section/Django, the bits part is everything after the key section, and in this case it would be Django would be passed in the bits. So what we want to do is use those bits to load up the model on which the feeds are going to be based. To do that, first we want to just do some checking, and the checking that we want to do is just to make sure that we got the right number of bits. If a user just typed into the URL/section and nothing after it, we wouldn't know what model, in other words, what section to return feeds for, and so we would want to raise an error in that case. So we're going to type, if the length of the bits is less than 1, then go ahead and raise up object does not exist exception. If we do have the right number of bits, then we're going to go ahead and return, and we'll just load up objects.getSlug is going to be bits, and the last bits that we're looking for. Now you're required to implement this GetObject in a model-based feeds, and then that object gets passed to the other methods that we'll be using now. Now in the case above, when we were dealing with a single feed for our entire website, we just had something called link, blog, or title, or description, and we were able to just use attributes and spell out exactly what the information was that we were looking for. When we get down to the model-based feeds, we want to provide some context-sensitive information. And so the Django syndication framework provides for us the ability to use methods and pass back meaningful or context-sensitive entries for these items. So you'll see how that works out here. Let's just start with title. We're going to go ahead and do def title self, and in each one of these cases, when we're implementing these using the method, we receive in a parameter called obj, and that's the object that was retrieved up here. We can work with that and do something more meaningful, like return a title that says my blog for section, and we might just use this obj.name. Now remember, this is the actual object, our section object. So if we look at our models class, we have access to name, slug, position, any of the properties or methods that are available on that object. So we're going to return back my blog for section, and we're going to use the obj.name. Description will be very similar. So let's go ahead and implement that now. Again, it receives a parameter called obj, and we're just going to say latest blog entries for a section, etc. For the link, we're going to take advantage of, kind of did these in backwards from the way that I did them up above. It doesn't really matter the order, obviously. But for the link, it's also going to receive a parameter called obj. And on this, we're going to return obj.getAbsolute URL. So we're going to go ahead and use that getAbsolute URL method that we implemented in our model for section. And remember, I said in the first episode that we need to make sure that those getAbsolute URL methods are implemented in all our models and that they're working properly before we even attempt to do feeds. Otherwise, you'll have all kinds of problems. So we're going to go ahead and use the getAbsolute URL method, which will return back the absolute URL to that specific section. And the last piece that we want to implement here is a method called items, just like we did above, but this time items will also receive in an obj, which again is our object, and we're going to load the articles based on that object. So I'm just going to do return article.objects.filter. Section is going to be section slug is going to be obj.slug. I can do order by pub date, descending if I want. I actually don't have to do this, and I didn't mention it in the first episode, but if you have a ordering like we do here in the meta class, then that's the ordering that it will use. Now I'm looking at the section here. I really should be looking down here. But the ordering for our articles in the meta class is get latest by pub date, and the ordering is pub date. So in that case, that's going to be the default ordering anytime you do any type of your query sets. So we'll go ahead and just leave that like that, and we can get back the last 5 like we did above. And again, it's up to you, whatever you feel is appropriate for your blog, the number of items that you want to return. So just to review, we have a new class called latest articles by section. It's also going to be inherited from feed. We specify our templates explicitly again so that we can use the same templates that we implemented last time. The key part of this is this GetObject method, which accepts some bits. Those bits are everything after the key in the feed dictionary in the urls.py. So everything, in this case, everything after the section. We're going to load it up. So we're going to return section objects get, and we're going to load it based on the slug using those bits that got passed in. For all of our methods here, we're receiving the parameter obj, and so we're going to use that to return context-sensitive information for our title, for our description. In the case of our link, we're going to use getAbsolute URL. And then finally, the items method also receives a parameter called obj, and we're going to return back all the article objects that have the section that have a slug of our object slug, and we're going to return the last 5. It's quite a mouthful, but I think it's pretty straightforward. And So once we have that in place, we actually don't need to do any more because our templates are already in place, and we can test it out. So let's go over to our web browser application, and we'll have to type it in manually because we haven't put any hooks into our UI to bring up these model-based feeds. But remember, our URL pattern match is going to be feeds/section/ and then whatever section. So let's just try Django, and sure enough it works. And there's first entry is a Django entry. Might be a little bit tough to decipher if we're getting the exact entries that we want. So let me try something with like .NET, where I know that I have only a single entry in here for .NET, and sure enough we get back the dot entry. So that's good. What we want to do now is go back to our base template and add something so that users could visually see that they could subscribe to just a particular section and not have to subscribe to our whole blog. And the way that we're going to do that here, and I mean, you have to decide, cosmetically what makes the most sense for you, and from a user experience, etc. But I'm just going to add a little feed icon next to each one of these that will take the user to the feed for that particular section. Before we do that, though, let's take care of one little housekeeping item. Remember I talked about that our feed classes could be dried up a little bit. We've got this title template here and this description template here. We've got those repeated below. Since Django, we're just dealing with Python classes, we can go ahead and dry those guys up a bit by creating a base class called feed base, whatever you want really. Specify those in there and then inherit from feed base instead of the feed class. Now that doesn't add a whole lot, but it's a good idea to refactor your code as you work and just try to keep things cleaned up. So let's check it out and make sure that everything's working properly. We need to inherit down here too. So let's check it out and make sure everything's working properly. Click this and we still get our feeds latest. And if we type in feeds section Django, we also get that as well. So I just like to take care of those things as we go along. Let's get into implementing the feed links here for each of our sections. To implement those feed links, we need to modify our base template because that's where the sections information exists. In fact, we're right here at it. You can see we have a sidebar here that says called sections and some divs and a UL that cycles through and gets each section. And the section link there is pointing to the GetAbsolute URL for the section. So what we want to do is add in another link with an image in it right before that section name. So I would place that right here, and we can just type an ahref equals, and let's come back to this in a second. And then the image here is just going to be, the source is going to be, I'm using im as a mapping for my media, and then it's going to be images, and I've got a feed icon called feed icon. It's just a little standard feed icon. The width of that is 12 pixels, and the height of it is also 12 pixels. Okay, and so we'll close that off, and then we'll also close off the ahref link, the anchor. Now when we get into the href here for this, you might be tempted to do what we did up here. If you recall last time, we did an href and we used the URL pattern match tag there to point to blog feeds, and we passed in latest. And what that did is that basically did a lookup into our URLs pattern and passed in feeds / latest and so forth, and we got the right link for our latest feeds URL. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this just to show you. You might be tempted to just say, well, let me do this, copy that, and then come down here and paste that in and then modify it accordingly. So in this case, your key would be section, but if you remember that there's section and then you have to pass after that a / and whatever the section is. So that would be section name. Well, you really can't, or section slug, sorry. So you might be tempted to do something like section / this and then do section slug here, but this is not going to work because we've got this syntax here within this syntax, and just to show you, if I do that, I get my icons, but if you look down at the URL down there, it's going to be something very obscure. It's the bracket section slug bracket. So that's not going to get it for us. So what we want to do is not do this, but what we can do is take sort of a lesson from this get absolute URL, and we can implement our own URL permalink thing in our model class called Getfeed URL. So that's another way of attacking. Now there's a lot of different ways you can go about this, but that's just one way you can do that. So let's do that. We're going to go over to our models.py module, and down here in the and this is in the section class here, we're going to come down here and we're going to basically implement something similar to the get absolute URL. So I'll go ahead and copy those, and we're going to call it Getfeed URL. Okay, and instead of returning this object detail stuff, we're going to go ahead and return back the syndication views feed. The reason for this is because that's what we used here in our pattern match, was Django contrib syndication views and then feed. So we're going to use the same thing, Django contrib syndication views feed, and instead of a slug, it's expecting a key called URL. Let me go back and show you that. Whoops. Instead of a slug, it's expecting here, in this case, a URL pattern match. So we need to make sure we fill that in, because what it's going to look for when it goes to find this lookup is it's going to look for this Django contrib syndication views feed, and then look that the parameters are passed in exactly the same number and type that's being expected here in the pattern match. So we're going to do one called URL, and the URL that we're going to use is going to be section / and then we're going to add in self slug. Down here, instead of get absolute URL, this is going to be get feed URL, and we're also going to use the permalink to get feed URL. And that's all it takes. Let me review that just briefly. What we implemented here was a method called getFeed URL, and it needs to do a lookup into the URL's pattern match for Django contrib syndication views feed, passing in a pattern match called URL section, spell that right or we'll have problems, section / and then whatever the slug is. So the slug is going to be whatever it is for the section, and then we add the permalink method there. Alright, now again, this is just one way to do it. There are other ways to attack this problem. You could have hard-coded section / and then use brace section.name in your base template, but then you're hard coding your URL pattern match, and this way you're not doing that. So let's save that and go back to our base template, and instead of this here, what we will enter in here is going to be brace and then section dot Getfeed URL. Okay, and I'm going to add one more thing. I forgot to add the style reference here for the ahref, so I'm going to go ahead and add that in, and that's just a class. I think I called it feed. So we do that, and we can go back to our web browser, refresh, and now if you notice we hover over them, we get, in this case, /blog/feeds/section Django. In this case we get /Rails and /JavaScript and /.net. If we select that, then we do get just the .NET model-based feed for our blogging application. And likewise, if we do the Django one, then we get just the Django feeds. This is real nice, so visually the user can see that we're providing feeds for the different sections. One thing I forgot to mention in the last episode was that if you notice that the browser I'm using here is implementation of Firefox, if you are using Safari, you're going to have problems. And let me just show you the issue. This is a known bug, but if we go to our blogging application here in Safari, that works fine. If we try to click on the RSS feed, we're going to get this error here about the page could not be redirected. Safari has, I don't know if it's some kind of security issue or what it is, but it's a known issue that when you're trying to access feeds using localhost, it doesn't work properly. And also notice that it strips out the HTTP here. So you'll have issues if you're trying to follow along and use Safari. And I should have mentioned that last time, but anyway, here it is. There is one final item that I want to cover in this episode, and that is how would you go about implementing Atom-based feeds instead of RSS feeds. See, Django out of the box is by default is going to deliver up RSS 2.01, I believe, feeds for the syndication framework, but it also supports 0.91 for RSS and 1.0 for Atom. And so let's say we wanted to implement an Atom feed instead of an RSS feed for whatever reason. It's really easy to do. What we need to do is add an import here. And the import is going to be from Django utils, feed generator. We're going to import Atom1 feed. Once we do that, we can set the feed type. Let's say we're just going to do Atom for some reason in our latest articles. You can do it in both, you can do it in neither, whatever, however you want to do it. But let's just say we're going to do it here. We add an attribute called feed type, and we set that equal to the Atom1 feed. And that's really all we have to do. But one thing about Atom and RSS that are different is that RSS supports the description element and Atom does not. Atom supports subtitle. They're two different things, but they're somewhat similar. So in some cases you may want to do a line that says subtitle here equals description. And what that will do is set your subtitle the same thing as your description, which is okay in this case since it's short. So we'll go ahead and save that up. And if we go back to our blogging application, refresh, and I click on this, we still get our feed, but there's nothing here to sort of indicate to you that this is an Atom feed. There are a lot of different ways to do that. We can just drop into iTerm here and use curl and just hit our blogging application at localhost 8000/blog/feeds/latest. And I'm going to go ahead and pipe that into more, and just so that we can look at the raw XML that's coming back, and you can see here that the XML namespace for this now is Atom. So it in fact is using Atom. You can also see that subtitle is being used here for the Atom feed. And so that's a good way to kind of check your feed and make sure everything's working. Obviously, you're going to do some other things, like there are feed validators on the web that you want to use with your feeds. It's a good idea. Do it frequently just to make sure you're not having issues. Also, the other thing is it's a good idea just to subscribe to your own feed, so that it kind of sounds funny, but that way when you post a new entry, then you can see that it shows up properly. Now, you wouldn't want to do this with some sort of high volume feed type thing, obviously, but it's a good idea to monitor that. So we can see that everything's working fine there. And that's about it. I do want to encourage you, though, there is so much more in the syndication framework. There's tons and tons of things you can set. It supports enclosures. It supports a lot of different items, and there's no way I could really cover them all. And also, it would be pointless. They've done such a great job in the Django documentation. If you go to the website and go to documentation, down here we have a section called Syndication right there. And if you go in there, you read it, there's a lot of wealth of information down here. And if you come down past the initial tutorial, which is pretty much everything we've covered, you get to a section here that says Feeds Class Reference. This gives you every attribute that's available, every method that's available, and what you can do with that. And so I encourage you to experiment with that and have fun. And I'll see you again at the next Django screencast. Thank you.